I also got it. All right, got it. Cool. Right. So I was thinking that I'm thinking a bunch of things, right? So one of the things was I want to encourage more people to record like 15 to 20-minute videos with their friends, the mutuals, and upload it to YouTube. I
Mhm.
find that length of time feels pretty close to, I mean, okay, if you can do like 8 to 12 minutes, even better, but
Yeah.
I think like 15 to 20 minutes is fine.
Yeah.
And
Aim
something about that
for
length of
8 to 12, and then like if it spills over, it still won't be too long.
Yeah, and the idea there is that it's just really easy for people to kind of pop in and listen without feeling like it's a big commitment, and then they can leave comments, and there's something about that interaction mode. I found myself watching a bunch of videos very easily, and it's funny because I would be unlikely to commit to watching an hour-long video, but I
Totally.
have gone from like 12 minutes to 12 minutes to 12 minutes, and oh wait, it's almost been an hour. So this is an example of one such video, right? Like we're doing it in real
Yep.
time.
Yep.
And the topic that we brought up in conversation that made us want to do this was how to talk about what you're doing. Right. So what are your
Mhm.
thoughts on how to talk about what we're doing?
Well, my latest one is inspired by this experience I had of talking um, with my friend Michael Smith about how he and I are kind of working on the same meta project, but different aspects of it. And so we have this short video, which is one of the ones that inspired you to be
Mhm.
thinking about this as well. We have this short video where we're basically first we're explaining together the project that we're both working on. We are not in any official capacity working on it together. Like this isn't like we're not on a team that has any sort of org anything. Um,
Nice.
but we're both in some sense working on this same meta project around the evolution of human culture and so forth. And so we spend the first half of the video explaining what we're both doing together. And then we spend the second half of the video explaining um, kind of how, the different facets or different angles of it that we're each looking at.
Mhm.
And that just seems like a really cool format. Like I want to see
Yep.
100 videos like that. I don't like I'd watch all 100, but I'd watch the ones that seem interesting or relevant to me. And I think you could
Right.
even have, they don't have to all be separate pairings. It's like you and I could do exactly that shape of video. Like in what sense are you and I working on exactly the same project? And then like within
Mhm.
that project, what are our different kind of roles? And one question I think mode is really powerful for clarifying that is th- there's there's the thing you're trying to do, and then there's
Mhm.
stuff that you'll do if you have to in order to do that thing, and then there's the stuff that you really want to focus on. And so the way that
Right.
you find the difference between those latter two is moments when you find yourself saying, oh, I'm so glad that you're taking care of that thing because that lets me
Uh,
focus on this.
yeah.
And that
Right.
helps you distinguish between what's really yours to
Mhm.
do, like what really feels like is driving you.
Right. Nice. When you say that, I instantly thought of several such things. Right. So, for example, our friend Rich, he's working on his like micro solidarity thing, and there's like all that structural elements to it. Like he's really going deep on like the specifics of how groups of people can and should interface. And
Mm-hmm.
like, I have an interest in those things, but that's not like the thing I'm most obsessed about. And so that would have been a thing that like, if I were writing a book on the subject, for example, like I would have to research it to make my point, but I wouldn't have a lot of fun researching that part
Mm-hmm.
because to me it's kind of obvious, but like, it's, I mean, not necessarily kind of obvious, but like I don't get off on the details there. I'm okay like hand waving, but I know that I need the details at some point, right? And another example I'll think of is like what Anna is doing with the intellect, which is like, again, like
Right, it's
I
like
have kind
hosting
of,
all of these things.
yeah, it's like this very deliberate, paid, formal-ish structure. And I've always been like, I was always personally torn about like, so I want to do events and organize people and stuff. And like, should I do it formally or informally? My instinct is to do it informally. But like, what if formally is better? I don't actually know for sure. And like,
Mm.
Anna, by doing her thing, has like forked the path for me. And
Right, because now
she's
she's taken care of formally.
yeah, so i
Yeah.
can i can prioritize like, oh, if you want to do a formal event, let's just and in fact I can host an intellect event and
Right.
borrow the II's structure, but I'm
Yeah.
not responsible for the II. And so I
Yeah.
get freed up to do like completely freestyle. I can tweet who wants to show up at the park on this day, and like I can focus on that. And that's just, it's so wonderful to have like all these like different branches that other people are taking responsibility for. So I
Yeah.
can kind of like carve out the separate one that's mine.
Totally. So what would you say is an example of a situation where you go, you know, like, wow, I love that you're doing that because it frees me up to do this. Like those are sort of, or what's the example with Richards maybe? Like, because you kind of said like with respect to II, it's like you want to run more informal events, or you want to run a formal event that's not in your big whole container. You can just show up and run it.
Yeah.
What would you say that is for with Richard?
Yeah, so I think he is approaching it from a more, I mean, so from my frame of reference, it's slightly more academic. I don't know if he would. I imagine.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean, though.
Like,
no, it has a kind of yeah.
It's so if let's say as a informal, as a kind of nebulous group of like peers and friends who are interested in these things, like Rich is much better positioned to like give a talk to an organization about like a company, like a business, right? Like, because he has that credential kind of thing, whereas I'm much more like I'll just host the after party bar stuff, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you know, if I didn't know that Richard existed, I might feel like I should put it on my to-do list that, oh, you know, one day I should build up
codify some of these things around how to do group sort of, or you know, organizing and stuff.
But now I can just be like, oh, if you want to do this, you should talk to Richard. If you want to do that, you should talk to Anna. If you want to do this, you should talk to Malcolm. And like that, just, you know, like it allows specialization and trade, which is like, I was geeking out about how. So Jane Jacobs has this point, which when I first read it, I thought, wow, that's stated very, very strongly with a lot of confidence that I don't know if it's merited. But like, you know, and she's like, that's her perspective was informed by a lifetime of work. And her point of view is like, oh, all wealth is created by specialization and trade. And I was like, that's it? Like, if true, like huge if true, right? And it's like, oh, okay, like how are we each specializing? And so, you know, my other friend, Sam Martin, he's like a physio who has like, he's not like a marketing specialist. Like he's good at fixing people's physical pains. And then he just showed up in my mentions one day and he was like giving feedback to people. Like, and it's so funny because I remember I was tweeting about some pain that I had and I was almost embarrassed by it. And he just showed up and other people started sharing their pains. And he was like, oh, you should just do this. You should just do that. And it was like resolving so many people's ailments. And I was like, oh, wow, I can just introduce this guy to people. So from my point of view, all I have to do is introduce Sam to other people and I fix their back pain. Like, Because Sam is the one who is helping people, but Sam's reach was limited to 100 people or something.
But then from his perspective, all he has to do is hear about their back pain and he's got the solution. Maybe, right? Exactly. I mean, doesn't always, so, but like, because he's specialized in that, he can just show up and it's obvious, right? Like, he just says the obvious. Meanwhile, from your perspective, you hear someone has back pain, you're like, oh, I'll just say the obvious. Go to Sam. Like, it's just like, like, so there's this kind of network of obviousness to the whole thing.
Right. So, and that in turn helps me understand Jane's point better, like in an embodied sense. Like, oh, so that's the history of civilization. Like, some blacksmiths like, oh yeah, I can just do this for you, and the baker's like, oh yeah, I have all this bread, and oh yeah, you know, just, you know, everyone just trading.
That's beautiful.
Is that it? Is there anything else we should say before we wrap up?
Well, let's see. So I mean, like, lenses on how to talk about what you're doing. Okay, so one of the other ways that we sort of found our way onto this call was like, so I just made this tweet, which I'll just read. I'll just read it out. So the tweet says, below, explain what you're working on in a tweet. Could be a big purposeful project or a fun side puzzle. I'll put a link to this tweet, by the way, down in the video description. Nice. Explain what you're working on in a tweet. Could be a big purposeful project or a fun side puzzle. That's step one. Step two, other people. Reply and tag the person you know whose work seems the most closely related. Step three, person who's tagged, share your angle on what you're both doing. And and so this was inspired by this experience of the conversation with Michael, and then also by an experience I just had of talking with Isabella Granick, who described what she was doing. And I'm like, that sounds like Richard Bartlett. Please explain how what you're doing is not what Richard Bartlett is doing. And it was like, you know, and this is kind of like one of the classic ways people would explain startups, to say, it's like this, except, you know, it's sort of, which is related to the whole everything is a remix thing. Anyway, I had this tweet and I was sort of commenting to you in DMs that I felt like some of the replies weren't very good at sort of describing what they were doing on a level of abstraction that plausibly someone else would be doing the same thing. Now, I think that's partially
Right.
my tweet was poorly phrased. Like it could have, if it had said instead, I think what step 2 should have said is other people reply with, quote, isn't that what blank is doing?
That's genius. Yeah.
Right? Like that's what I really wanted to get at. Like, how's that different from what blank is, what at whoever is doing? It's like really trying to get at that essence of like, you know, a level of description that someone would come along and see it and be like, isn't that just what whoever, like, not just what, but like, isn't that the same as this person? And then the other person comes along and go ahead.
Yeah. So the wonderful thing in relation to what we were talking about earlier is that, again, so everyone is working on, so from some people's perspectives, they might think, oh, Visa, Anna, and Rich, they're all doing the same thing. They're just like talking to people and organizing stuff. And that's great because me and Anna could have a conversation about what we do differently. Like, oh, mine is formal, hers is mine is informal, and hers is formal. And me and Rich could have a conversation about, oh, you know, like how structured are we kind of discussing concepts. And some people, I think, instinctively, like you were saying, right, like they kind of flinch and seethe a little bit, like bristle at the idea of, oh, no, what I'm doing is not the same as what, you know, like don't confuse us. But it's actually a jumping off point for let's discuss how it's different. And so it's like, it's the fact that people mix things up or see things as similar is not actually a bad thing. It's a starting point for,
well, and it's inevitable. Like, you know, people are always making generalizations, always.
Yes. Yeah. And that's, in fact, that's good actually. You know, it's like it helps people. It's like it's why we have genres, right? Like, so, you know, like I know that anecdotally when they made the movie Alien, they pitched it as Jaws in space. Right. And it's like being able to compare Alien and Jaws, which are two separate movies that have some similarities through, and allows you to, it enriches your appreciation of both. You know, it doesn't diminish either that they have some similarities. It lets you see the choices that I've made, and you get to contrast your appreciation of each thing. So it's really helping people see how discussing similarities and differences enriches both, right?
Yes,
it's a useful thing to set up.
Exactly. Yeah. And one other fun puzzle that I would have is somehow explain how all of what you've been doing the whole time, even the projects that seem to have nothing to do with each other, are somehow like related to like one basic concept. So I could tell you what mine is when I've tried to do this.
Say more, like what
so for me, like I would summarize things as like, I've always been fascinated with the nature of interfaces.
Okay.
So it's like, so then I would say, okay, and I think this does actually say something very central to the nature of like literally how I pay attention to the world. Like, I think I've caught on to something really key here. I think it's possible to try to describe this and like miss whatever's key, but ultimately you are the same person who is paying attention to the same world, whatever it is that you're doing. And there may be something about the nature of how you pay attention that you can kind of distill. And so it's like my attention to interfaces applies to how I relate to objects and design. It's where the whole "what if we made it good though" thing came from. And then it's also it applies to how I think about how humans interact, right? Like human to human interfaces is also relevant to this whole interface puzzle. And, you know, it's a bit of a stretch, but I could say, okay, and then I write songs, and I'm thinking about those songs as being an interface between my soul and their soul. That's a weird way to think about songs. It's not how everybody would think about it, but that feels pretty natural to me. Like it's not like obvious. It's not like the first way I describe it, but I'm like, yeah, no, it's totally, you know.
I mean, the word interface literally means, you know, interface, right? So and that's actually reminding me of, and this ties back to like our prompt, right? It's reminding me of like the idea that whatever you do, people will misunderstand it in simplistic ways. So since knowing that that's going to happen, you might as well parody yourself in a sense. You might as well caricature yourself with the knowledge that, again, like you have all the complexity, but then so the complexity will be reduced into something overly simple, right? And I know that like some like more like scientific and rigorous and like, you know, nuanced minded people get troubled by that. They're like, oh no, you know, like you can't simplify my 1,000-page thing into like 3 words.
And there
But
is
like,
something important there around like if you force an expert to make everything they're doing legible to non-experts, then
mhm,
they stop being able to actually have their expertise. Their expertise comes
that's
from the
fair,
fact
that's
that they
fair.
know things that are not legible.
Correct,
And then
correct, yeah.
someone had a whole paper about this that I thought was kind of cool. It's like transparency is surveillance was the title of the paper.
Ah, I get it. I get it. That makes sense.
It's
Yeah,
like
that
if you're
makes
forced to
intuitive
be
sense for me.
transparent, then you kind of have to
Yeah,
lie or you have to
yeah,
simplify to a degree that you
right.
can't actually have the
Yeah.
thoughts you're trying to have.
And like even like in a social context, right? If we have to surface every single thought that we have, there will be thoughts that we stop having because we
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
go off and be
totally.
uncertain and doubtful, right? So you need
Yeah,
privacy, you need safety to make mistakes, blah blah. Anyway, yeah. So I definitely so I do, now that you mentioned that, I'm reminded like, so there's this tension between like the full detail and complexity and like you know, almost like how would you like to be misunderstood, right? Like, how would you
yes,
like to be
yes, yeah,
simplified? And like some people kind of get like marketing brained or whatever, and they just, oh, slogans are all we need. We just need, you know, build a wall, you know, whatever, like
yeah.
3 sentence PT thing, and that's all we need. We don't need any substance, and that's
Right.
not,
Yeah. No,
you know,
you need
but
both.
yeah. So if you can get the full spectrum of it, and you respect both, and it's like I'm also now thinking of like your thing about like seeing with two eyes, right, and perspective, and
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
right. So you
Totally.
have the
And
complexity and you have this.
one
Mhm.
thing you could do is I don't do this nearly as often as I think I could, but like sometimes I'll go to tweet something and then I'll be like, there is a flaw in my tweet. Should
Mhm.
I try to clarify it? And then I'm like, nah, I'll let someone else clarify it.
Ah, right. Okay.
Right? It's like I'm like aware that I'm tweeting a thing that I slightly disagree with. And if somebody comes
Right.
along and is like, sir, you left out this important edge case, I'll be like, I know actually, I
Yeah.
I wanted it to fit in one tweet and I like and then it becomes actually it's like rather than having a smooth polished surface of a tweet that
Mm,
has no
mm,
flaws, you have a
right.
surface of a tweet that people can kind of get traction on because it's got these
Yeah.
rough patches. It's like these places where
Yeah.
it's incomplete. It's not trying to be perfect and done and clean and polished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the parallel funny thing I've noticed is sometimes when I ask a question on Twitter, people assume that I don't know the answer, and or they respond as if
Oh,
I don't know the
yeah,
answer.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
and,
yeah.
and, it, and it could be that, you know, they're just scrolling really quickly, they see a question and they're like, oh, the person's asking a question because they don't know the answer. But very often when I ask a question, it's because I want to know what other people's answers are. And it's
Yeah,
just so
yeah.
entertaining to see the spectrum of different responses will have different levels of awareness of the possibility that you know the answer or you don't, and like
Right,
it's
right.
so fascinating.
Yeah.
And yeah, have we gone
I
off
think
what
that's
we were trying to say?
probably plenty. I mean, it's
We
like
were
about
trying
how to explain what you're doing.
Yeah, so okay,
I
yeah,
mean,
I guess yeah, so I guess what I would like to kind of make my closing statement be sort of,
great.
right, like, is
Yeah.
think about, so I think it's funny to think about how would you like to be misunderstood, like if you are gonna be misunderstood, like which is the least wrong direction to be misunderstood in, or like which
Yeah.
misunderstanding is easiest for you to be like, oh, you know, I just need to add this thing and I just need to add that thing, and you're now
Yeah,
like
yeah.
way closer to
Which
understanding.
misunderstanding forms a good foundation on which to build better understandings versus which ones form like a kind of, oh no, this misunderstanding is now in the way.
Right. And we do this even with how we teach like science, right? Like we're like, oh, an atom is the smallest thing.
Right, right.
And you learn more, like, oh, actually, you know, within the atom, there's blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah.
like, you can't go straight to like muons and whatnot with like
Yeah.
physics, right? So you start with
Yeah.
atoms, good enough, you know, like, so thinking in like these intermediate steps makes it easier to like kind of bring people along the journey of getting to approximate better and better understandings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah.
My closing thought will be this thing I've been kind of like nudging you with repeatedly, which is if you're having trouble explaining something, try explaining it to someone who like almost already gets it.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to go into all of the details of all the stuff that most people don't get because you're not
That's
writing for
true.
most people as you've written in your most people article. You can just literally
Yeah.
not write for most people. You can just literally like write for one person. And so
That's true.
it's like yeah, I feel like I had another thing to say about that. Oh, just that it's related to why it was easy to lay out what the weird illegible work that I'm doing, talking with Michael, because he also understands it because he's also
Right.
doing it. And so it's like the two of us were able to
Right.
together to just kind of tease the thing out together because we already know what
Oh
we're
man.
looking at. I'm not trying to like explain to someone who doesn't even know the thing.
Right. And you know what's amazing about that? That actually rhymes with what you were saying in a strange way. It rhymes with the tweet that is like slightly imperfect. In the sense that the imperfection here is not what your interaction is, but it's from the reader's point of view, because you're not making an effort to like explain everything to them. So there's a gap in their understanding. So they'll witness two people having a conversation and they don't get a bunch of stuff because they don't have the context. But now there's the gap. There's that
Right. And they
imperfection
can
in
tell
that.
that these two people understand something.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it increases the sense of like, oh, this guy's not just going on about some crazy wild theory that he cooked up in his basement. It's like at least two people apparently have thoughts about this. And if they are simultaneously having thoughts about something while also disagreeing with each other about that something, that's like pretty good proof that there's a something there. I mean, you and I could
Yeah.
improv a scene where we make up a fake disagreement about something and like, I mean, that would be a fun game to play, right? But like
fun, yeah.
in practice, like you can probably tell that like people are relating to something that is real to each of them and that they're each seeing differently. So it sort of brings that thing to life. It's like you get to see a little bit through each of those eyes yourself.
Right.
And it
Yeah.
makes
I
the
remember
thing
that. Yeah.
pop in 3D rather than me just trying to say,
Yeah.
look at the thing. And you're like, I don't see
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And it helps
I'm
triangulate it.
guessing. Yeah, we are probably as social creatures very, very skilled naturally and wired to care about what two other people are talking. Like, hey, what we
More
talking
than just
about?
like
Okay.
one guy's like, I have things to say.
Yeah, you're like, okay,
Yeah.
sir, like take care, have a good day, right? Whereas
Yeah.
you're sitting in a coffee shop and you just overhear two people talking, like,
You're like,
huh,
what are
like
they?
you get drawn in. You almost can't help it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you
There's this
also,
thing where they get a kid to play with blocks by like the two adults
yes,
start
I
playing with the
love that.
blocks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's Inception, right? You just, instead of trying to persuade the kid, you guys have a good time, and now the
Yeah.
kid wants to get involved. Why are you guys
Yeah.
having a good time without me? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, you're making me realize that with my essays, for example, like yeah, I think I've been burdening myself unnecessarily with, oh, I have all these ideas that I guess I've been like brainstorming with my friends and whatever, and I should explain this to the masses, like I should explain it to people. And like I'm like, oh my god, how do I even begin to convey
Yeah.
stuff and be interesting and be fun
Yeah.
for a lot of people? And then I'm
Yeah.
like, whereas I should really just write for my friends. I should write for like one guy, like yo,
Yeah, that's I've been doing a bunch of that. Like I wrote
Yeah,
Michael a 5,000 word thing the other day, and then I kept having
nice.
related thoughts, so I've just added it to the doc. I don't even think he's read it. He's on vacation right now. Like he's been traveling, but like I got so much out of just like laying. I was like,
Yeah.
I started, but it started with a message to him asking him a question. I got to about 400 words. I was like, this is too long. I'm going to make a Google Doc out of it, and I just kept writing. And I was like, wow, this is a whole useful train of thought, and I can go really deep and precise here because it doesn't need to make sense to anyone other than me and him.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I've given people this advice before, like about writing, like, oh, write for a specific person. Like even with marketing, right? Like an open letter to a specific individual always gets more attention than like hear ye, all one and all. Like, so if somebody wrote like an open letter to Brad Pitt, like I'm not Brad Pitt, but somebody's like, oh, Brad Pitt, here's a thing you need to know. I'm like, okay, fine. I'm gonna read. Like, just what does this person think he needs to say to that? Like, yeah, maybe it's gossip. I don't know. But it's
Right,
like
right.
we're wired for it. So you might as well use it for good, right? Like use it for things that you think are interesting. And now I'm kind of amusedly wondering, like, what are the ways that we can use that? I've actually been doing a little bit of it on my own Twitter with my alts. Like I'm kind of experimenting with it.
Right.
Sometimes I want to talk about a thing, and what I do is I use my alt and I ask my main a question. I'm like, hey Visa, what were you saying about this thing? And I'm like, oh yeah, there's that. And then like I have friends who follow both me and my alt, and that's a way for me to share stuff with my friends through that without it being
cool.
like, oh, I'm proclaiming this to everyone.
Right. Oh, interesting. Yeah. So sort of right, but it's still from Maine is how it was where it's getting. Yeah.
And so I'm now testing. I was just gonna say I'm now testing that with other people as well. So I literally just ask you or ask somebody else, like, hey,
right.
Malcolm,
You had one
explain this to me
the other day. Like explain the Wi-Fi thing.
Yeah, and so then it's no longer like you giving a soapbox speech where it needs to be correct for everyone. Like, oh, everyone, let me tell you about the Wi-Fi thing. Like, it's like, oh, Visa wants to know. Okay, sure.
Yeah,
so it's
yeah.
It can if it doesn't solve for everyone's understanding, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so then it invites that right for one person
Right.
flavor. Yeah.
So now when there is a misunderstanding, the onus is actually because you're eavesdropping, right? Like the onus is on the eavesdropper to figure out what they don't know. Because yeah, because if I'm giving a speech into the public and the public's like, that doesn't make sense, it's the speaker's fault that we don't understand. But if Malcolm and Visa are having a conversation and someone else doesn't understand, that's their fault that they don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's not. It's not their fault, but it is like they can't claim that it didn't make any sense. They have to say, I didn't understand what they were saying.
Right.
I guess they understood, right? And this is, I think, part of why podcasts are so powerful, because and interviews in general, because what you have is a context in which, even if a lot of people are disrespectful to your ideas and would shoot you down, the host, as long as they're not, you get the chance to kind of lay out your ideas and have them engaged with curiously. And as long as what you're saying makes enough sense to the host, which is a thing, you do actually have to achieve that. I think if you don't achieve that,
of course,
then you end up with one of those kind of awkward situations, even if it's intended to be positive as opposed to an antagonistic interview. But as long as you achieve, like if the host has a moment where they go, oh, yeah, then it's like, okay, as the listener, like insight has been achieved. Maybe not for me, but like, this is a sign that the person's ideas are in some way insightful. Anyway, we've been going on for, I think, 25 minutes now, so maybe we want to just cap this here insofar as we want to set a good example for people of making shorter videos. So
fair enough. An attempt was made.
Yeah. All right, sweet.
All right, catch you around.